First, Epicureanism. Think of it as the view from the garden. This is a kind of, it's a really good summary, a really good mental image. It's also true in that after its founders began their philosophy, both of them moved to Athens. And Epicurus, the founder of Epicureanism, he moved to a garden, a big villa with a garden outside of Athens, where he lived with his friends and his students. And it's much more, the garden is a great image also of sort of how Epicureanism is seeing itself. Okay, founder of Epicureanism, also where it gets its name, Epicurus. You can see roughly the era. Big idea, happiness is pleasure. Physical and mental pleasure. Epicurus starts off in the islands outside of Greece. Interestingly enough, same island Pythagoras was on, the founder of a lot of what we know of mathematics. Also another philosopher there at the same time as him who came up with this crazy idea that the Earth actually goes around the sun. Okay, major ideas that are forming. First, his idea of the world. Atomic materialism. As we said before, he's a materialist. So we can only learn through experience. And here's a previous version of this lecture. The world is composed of atoms. Tiny little particles. Because if you notice, most things, if you take chalk or paper or something like that, they can always be divided into smaller parts, until there's just dust. And as far as we know, that dust can be subdivided, but logically, empirically, and they're actually pretty good scientists. They make some pretty good arguments as to why there has to be a point beyond which nothing can be divided. And they call these not cut, the uncuttables, the atom. And these little particles, out of which the world is composed, they sort of fly through the void, through space. They randomly hook up to form things, and then disintegrate and go back to being individual atoms. They tend to be attracted towards similar atoms, and they tend to move into groups. Now, how do they form the world? Well, you see this all the time, this sort of thing all the time. You know, where does a body come from? Out of atoms. Have you ever watched a flock of starlings? Those really annoying blackbirds that travel in the big groups, especially in East Tennessee. They're just sort of scary. And then they go up in groups, and you just see this cloud. It's sort of moving. It forms a shape. And yet each one of those birds is an individual. If you ever go to an aquarium and watch sardines, anchovies, any small fish, small schools of fish, they seem to move as an entire group. They all go together in spite of the fact that it's composed of tiny little individual fish. Clouds. A cloud. You think that's a cloud. It's one shape. It's one form. And yet, just happens to be a whole bunch of little water particles that are hanging out together. Now, water particles are attracted together. They tend to form clouds. But still, it's tiny little individual particles that are being held together. And, he would say as an atomist, in the same way, those water particles are formed out of tiny little atoms which come together to form water particles. So, that's his view of the universe. Problem with this, well, it's not really a problem. It's not a problem at all. It's just the way the world is. Things come together. All those water particles come together to form clouds, then they rain, and the clouds are gone. All those starlings come together to form a group, and at some point they all fly away. At some point they all die, and that flock of starlings isn't there anymore. Bunch of atoms come together to make you, to make me, and at some point they'll go. I'll disintegrate. I'll no longer be. And all those atoms will go on, and they'll form something else. Dirt for a while, then who knows what. It's the way the world is. Fate. What happens to us, when you get right down to it, has an awful lot to do with random particles moving through space. It's not a plan. It's random particles moving through space. Those starlings aren't going on a straight linear direction that's been planned out. They just happen to wander together. Clouds have no real plans, no real goals, no real ambitions, no ultimate purpose that's guiding them. No, it's just a bunch of water particles that happen to come together. And they come together because water particles are attracted to other water particles. But that's not some sort of ultimate meeting in your life. All sorts of crazy things can happen to you. Sometimes fate will be good to you. All sorts of wonderful things will happen. Everything will just line up and come together. Sometimes the world's just going to dump on you. I had to come up with a word. Dump on you. And fate's going to be awful to you. That's the way the world is. Or the way he says the world is. I'm not always that depressing. And in this material world, in this random fate that's treating you, not even the gods seem to be that happy in helping us, that interested in helping us. What gods there may or may not be seem to be off doing God stuff. If they are all-powerful, obviously, they don't care that much about us, or else they'd be helping us. If they care about us, obviously, they're not all-powerful, because they can't change the basic fact that the world is unpredictable and full of pain. Not quite what he liked simple pleasures, so that's kind of changed. And he even has an app named after him, Epicureanism. It's a great source for recipes for one of the great natural and necessary desires, food, good food. Wow, how many philosophers have their own apps?